Fraunhofer Research Institute, Wolfgang Schuch, promueve la cooperación alemana en el funcionamiento de centros de investigación con el objetivo de permitir usos industriales avanzados. Fomenta la transferencia de conocimientos y el intercambio de investigadores y de personal técnico entre instituciones.
I'd like to thank UBTech for giving me the chance to come and listen to the success stories which we heard before, and also to give you a slightly different perspective from the German point of view, how innovation, how the transfer from science to the marketplace is happening to create value. First, I want to just introduce you to the name Fraunhofer. Everybody thinks it's got something to do with women, and many people spell Fraunhofer Frauenhofer, but it's actually not. It's really based on a man who lived about 250 years ago, Josef von Fraunhofer, who typified what the Fraunhofer Institutes are all about. He was a scientist, he was an engineer, he was a constructor, he was certifier for individual processes, all to do with optical development, and glass production method developments. And as part of that, everybody knows the Fraunhofer Schlieren, the breakdown of the white light into the different subsections of the light. But with it, he also created probably the basis for much of the optical industry, which is available in Germany now. And I think the idea of linking practical science with practical applications, with business development, with developing extra value, I think typifies what Fraunhofer is all about. On the next slide, you'll see that we are the largest application-oriented research organization in Europe. We are providing research support for new products and services for the German industry. The German industry is known to be highly competitive in the international markets, and many people contribute to it, to the development of the infrastructure and the system which Germany has developed, where Fraunhofer is included as an application-oriented research organization. We do not produce our own products like many of the people who we heard about here today are doing. We are supporting companies in the quest to produce new products or services. So in fact, you can think of Fraunhofer as in two different ways. One is we are generating new intellectual property for processes and service developments, and we are basically an engineering company which develops large-scale pilot plants, similar to what we heard a moment ago from our previous speaker. So it's very interesting to see your model too. No, not yet. Let's go back. We've got 67 institutes with 23,000 scientists. I think the key thing is really the next thing. We've got a very big budget. Out of a 2 billion euro budget, out of it 1.6 billion comes from contract research. So this is one of the models in the world where industry goes to an institution such as Fraunhofer for research services of a number of different ways. And I think that's the thing which sets Fraunhofer completely apart from many other models which people have developed. Obviously, for value creation, you need to file patent applications, and we file a patent application every day. We work both with large and small companies. I think the ability to work with a big network of companies in clusters or in individual groupings, I think is very important. You outlined that in your presentation, that's what you're striving to do. I think the key thing for us is the close collaboration with industries. And I will give you an example later on how one research line in one institute works with maybe 50 different companies. Now we can go to the next slide. I think the key thing which has happened in Germany is that there's been a national strategy to identify what the future will hold in technology development and technology needs. If you can go through that, it just simply shows a number of both internal initiatives which Fraunhofer had done to try and identify what the needs of industry in 20 years or in 30 years are, so that we can generate research strategies for the universities to research in those areas in fundamental aspects, and for Fraunhofer to develop complementary technologies to enable new process or product development, to enable companies eventually to utilize those for their benefits. I think, so this is really all about a technology foresight, a large-scale and long-term view in to enable German industry to become competitive or stay competitive on the international markets. The next slide. And these are the mega trends which everybody has talked about. You can just run through them quickly. About the environment, about energy, we heard a bit about that, about health, we talked about security and communication systems. And the Fraunhofer Institute, the 67 Institute, represent all of these different areas, because in Germany we need to have the capability to provide these research services for these big trends, for the type of industry which we have in Germany. On the next slide you see how some of the key technologies underline these different things. In their information technologies we talked about, production, optical technologies, material sciences, the biotechnologies and nanotechnologies, and things of that nature, where the application fields for the German industry are highlighted here. And this is part of what they call the high-stack strategy for Germany. You see it down there at the bottom, which is a strategy identified by the German Ministry of Science and Technology to support both industry, university, and applied research phenomena. The next slide shows that we are not only doing technical work. Much of the work which is described is about technical innovation, it's about pilot plants, it's about application and development of these technologies into industrial processes. But at the same time, we also have got 3 institutes which are solely dealing with innovation processes. So for example, we have one institute which is developing an innovation strategy for Mexico and has done it for Poland. So they're doing it for a country to develop the innovation ecosystem which we heard about early on today. The next slide. It's a very important part of the discussion which was started by the rector this morning, because in a way, I think what most of the things which we talked about today was, we've got universities, we've got things like the Max Planck Institutes who are really doing excellent science. But the transfer from there to the marketplace is often missing. And the bit which this void is filled in is by organizations such as Fraunhofer, who do this technology transfer on a practical scale, on a large scale, to enable companies to go and do these type of things. So our model is driven by a clear need by the industry. So if industry says for the future we need these and these type of technologies developed in Germany, then it will be more or less given that Fraunhofer develops or co-develops these type of things. If you go to the next point, just run through the next points. I think it's based on working very closely with fundamental science, using the best fundamental science to transfer things into the applied field. For example, all Fraunhofer Institute directors are also professors at universities. So there is that very close cooperation between the very fundamental science and the applied science, that people in a given field have a sense of what the next generation technologies are coming through from the science point of view, and can decide how to build applied research programs alongside that. And I think the other thing, obviously, is that we need to know how to collaborate in different networks, how we need to work with different companies. We need to find mechanisms by which confidentiality can be maintained, at the same time working for innovative new processes for a range of different companies. The next slide. We are largely a European-based organization. In fact, we are largely a German-based organization, because we're supposed to create a better environment for German industry to grow. However, we've got a number of different activities. When you look at it at the subsidiaries, there's some subsidiaries throughout Europe. You can see those red dots up there. But outside Europe, there are only 2. One in North America and one in South America. In North America, there's about 5 or 6 different Fraunhofer institutes who are grouped to do the same things which Fraunhofer is doing in Germany. And in Latin America, Fraunhofer Chile Research represents the same thing. And I'll talk a bit more about what we do in Santiago in just a few minutes. But on top of that, we've got other forms of collaboration. So we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Fraunhofer, but there are also other ways of collaborating. There are project centers, there are project collaborations and things of that nature, or there are advisors or marketing offices and things like this, where Fraunhofer attempts to attract new customers for their services. The next slide shows you in detail what there is in Latin America. As I said, there's Fraunhofer Chile Research Foundation, a non-for-profit organization based in Santiago. We've got 2 centers, and I'll talk about those in a minute, which are funded from long-term, from government funding in Chile. We also have a project center dealing with smart cities technology. And outside, there are 2 project centers on software and system engineering in Salvador, and then the Campinas Center for Innovations in Food and Bioresources, as well as the liaison office in Sao Paulo. But it's quite obvious that there are a number of countries missing from this kind of scheme, and one of the purposes for me to be here is to explore how we can actually set up some kind of opportunities in Argentina. The next slide gives you a little bit of a background of what happened in Chile. So the Chilean government had previously identified, previous Bachelet government had identified that innovation will help the country to create better jobs and create more wealth for a broader range of population. I think it's the underlying driver of how we can take science and create value from science. And they had established the initiative for the attraction of international centers of excellence after discussions with Fraunhofer and the German Chamber of Commerce, the RAHK, who's represented in the back of this room here. The implementation was eventually decided by the Ministry of Economy and their organization called CORFU, which is the Economic Development Agency for Chile. And there was a call made, and 4 centers were firstly selected. We were the first, and then there were some other ones from Europe which have followed through, and from Australia in mining. And then last year we had a second call which attracted 7 additional centers. The principle of the conditions for the establishment of the centers were largely the ones which Fraunhofer uses in Europe. So firstly, there is long-term funding from the government. For our Center of Systems Biotechnology, we've got 10 years funding. For our solar center, we've got 8-year funding. It also is based on close collaboration with universities, which is a very important point. It's just the Fraunhofer way of doing things in Germany, and it's the same for us in Chile. It also involves contributions, either financial or in-kind contributions from partner organizations. We were established in 2010 to be able to receive the funding from Corfu for our Center of Systems Biotechnology. Now you can go on to the next slide. So we are working very closely with the Fraunhofer Institute in Aachen together. Their name is Molecular Applied Ecology. And for example, they have got very nice facilities for vaccine production based on novel type of production systems based in plants. They've got several vaccines under development at the moment in clinical phase 1 and 2 trials for malaria and HIV, for example. In our center, as I said, we don't get any money from Germany. We only get money from Chile. I think that's part of the normal arrangements which are negotiated as part of these deals. At the present time in our center, we've got 120 scientists who have generated so far 2 granted patent applications. We've got 9 patent applications filed and 2 more are being filed this month. We've raised, since we've been in Chile, money for 20 new projects based on industry needs, and we anticipate that we will double that next year. And on top of that, we raised money from 24 new projects from public competitions. And that represents, if you like, one of the key things of the Fraunhofer model. You got long-term support from the government, and then the model says that you get around 33% or so of funding from public sources, but probably more than that from private sources. So that's one of the key pillars of Fraunhofer presence. The next one shows you just a couple of things about Fraunhofer IME. The director who has really spent a lot of time bringing Fraunhofer to Chile is Rainer Fischer. He's got sites not only in Aachen, but in Schmalenberg, in Münster, in Gießen, in Frankfurt, as well as Hamburg recently, and also obviously in the US and in Chile. In his institute, he's got around 350 scientists, and these are some of the business areas which are mentioned there. I think in line for the drug discovery activities which were discussed early on, it's quite interesting to note that Sanofi made a deal recently to give Fraunhofer IME their bacterial strain collection for the development of around 100,000 bacterial strains for the development of novel antibiotics. So there's a consortium set up in Europe which deals with it. It's a very big deal. On top of that, more recently, the European screening port for high-throughput screening for drugs, which is in Hamburg, was incorporated into Fraunhofer IME as well. So there are many, many different types of services in drug discovery or production, drug production activities which we can offer. The next slide shows you some of our partners who we've got in Chile. There's University of Talca, there's Fundación Chile, there's University Católica de Valparaíso, and then there is, more recently we added a private university to our mix as well, Andreas Veo University. And we're working very closely together with PUC, Católica de Chile. The next slide shows you our research lines. We don't really need to go through them too deeply, but we've got projects in agriculture, where we are doing a lot of work on bee health and bee products. In aquaculture, we've got our first product, which will be a therapeutic peptide to control a virus disease. It's a very nice platform based on very detailed molecular biology and molecular interaction screening for the development of peptides which interfere with biological processes. We've got products in the pipeline for fungal control, for bacterial control, for pest control in agriculture, as well as in aquaculture, as well as in human applications. We're doing biocomputing work and applied genetics to generate new varieties using advanced genetic tools, for example, for forestry. And we are using the latest genome research for disease monitoring to develop chips and labs on the chips for these type of applications. Our work on renewable resources is really focused on the development of value-added products from plants, but we've also got a work ongoing in bioenergy in that field. In nanobiotechnology, we have developed materials for the removal of arsenic from water, for example, and we are in discussions with several companies to scale the technology at the moment, as well as having developed nanomaterials which can capture pesticide residues which you find in food products, for example. And we are in discussions, we're in quite advanced discussions with one local and one international company on putting those products on the market. We have a line on nanomedicine, which is really all about delivery of DNA or RNA drugs. We don't need to go into much of the details there. And one of the things which we're actually trying to develop together with the city of Buenos Aires and also with the local university is our biomedicine line, in which we develop biomarkers for neurological diseases, and we provide preclinical research services there. But we also believe that we are the only people who've got a novel Alzheimer model for the development of Alzheimer drugs, in which we're using a Chilean animal which develops Alzheimer normally, and do behavioral tests with those, just like a doctor would do it if he sees an Alzheimer patient. So there's some very interesting novel opportunities for drug design like that. Our next slide, I think, shows you a little bit about Fraunhofer ISE, our second institute in which we are working. It's probably the second biggest solar energy institute in the world, with around 1,200 staff members, and you see some of the applications there. I think the interesting thing here is that ISE also provides certification services for the solar industry. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see what our the next slide, please. You see that we got funding for this center from the Ministry of Energy, but it's administered by Corfu. We are asked to make a contribution to the development of a solar economy in the north of Chile. So it is seen that there are many solar installations being developed to supply energy for the mining industry. And the question which people have is really, how can we really develop a novel type of industry which doesn't exist at the present time, based on the future development of those industries. There are some different research lines which you can see. Some of them are actually not too dissimilar from what you were talking about in your company and your center. The next slide gives you another overview. We also established a collaboration with Fraunhofer Focus for smart cities technology, in which we've got applications and concepts of smart cities, smart grid and electricity. We're doing quite a bit of work on smart buildings now, smart transport and mobility systems, connectivity to remote regions, and machine-to-machine communications. I think many of these projects or project platforms are actually applying themselves to the mining areas, and we are in discussions with many of the mining companies how we can get involved in working with them as part of this. But I think there's an opportunity to get other Fraunhofer institutes involved with mining applications as well, due to the work which Fraunhofer institutes have done in support of automation, secure technology development for production processes and things of that nature. The next slide, I think, just gives you an overview of some of the competence centers, or the divisions, if you like, which Fraunhofer has. And the next slide shows you the number of companies which you have in one of their centers. So I think that's actually the strength of Fraunhofer, that companies, whether they are small companies like Oracle or whoever is on the list there, can see them all, or smaller companies, are actually what SAP are working together with Fraunhofer, because Fraunhofer has got the capabilities for a number of things which the companies do not have, and particularly the advisory role which Fraunhofer institutes have to the government about technology development and technology implementation. So, for example, Fraunhofer runs a very large project on cloud computing for the public institutions in Europe, with, I think, 17 different countries and, I don't know, maybe twice as many different companies involved. The next slide is we are working also on these urban systems, which we call Morgenstadt project, which is a combination of a number of the different things, from ICT systems to resource systems to energy systems to building systems and things like this, to combine them all in some of the regions in Chile. The next slide is what we offer to industries. We offer networking services, consultancies and project evaluations, project management, pilot projects for product or market development, applied research projects to industries, technology transfer, patenting services, and also fundraising services for research projects. Because there is, as we heard early on here in Chile just as much as here in Argentina, a wider range of different funding sources available, and we are quite expert in trying to raise funds for work which is maybe too competitive or too risky before it can actually be properly applied. The next slide, I think, summarizes why I'm here. We want to establish networks with universities and government labs. And we want to go and build local projects based on local industry needs. I think there are, just from the discussions which we had previously and from what I saw this morning, there are quite a number of different things which we as Fraunhofer Chile Research can do with local institutions. I think we have to figure out how we can develop the scale-up competencies, just like you were talking about your pilot facilities and stuff like this, which you are building in your Vitec Center. We do a lot of work on patenting, as we said before. In fact, we do file patents in Argentina for some of the applications which you see in the wine industry, for example. And I think at the end of the day, we might want to figure out if it's appropriate for Argentina to think how we can get support for long-term research based on this Fraunhofer model. We will be working closely with the AHK, the German Chamber of Commerce, here as mediators to German companies, because remember, one of our goals is to support German companies in their export drive as well. But I think the key thing is really to develop proper economic value through our activities. I think that's all I've got to say.